Pro Football Focus analytics-driven website grades the Browns offseason excellent. What do you think?
It's hard to argue. You know, they really only made one significant signing, and that was John Johnson III. But then they attacked a lot of other areas of the team, adding Troy Hill. You know, Malik Jackson is a really nice signing. Anthony Walker, again, a really nice signing. It was just all very targeted, very in line with what they want to do on that defensive side of the ball, and in a lot of ways, what we expected that they would do. So, you know, they didn't sign the big names. They didn't spend a ton of money, but you could identify what they needed, and they went out and attacked it. And so I think while it wasn't a spectacular offseason that drew a bunch of headlines, it was just a really good, solid, targeted approach to free agency.
Well, here's a question. If they signed Jadeveon Clowney, is it a most excellent most excellent grade then? Is there anything higher than excellent?
Well, based on what I said in that first segment, yeah, I guess I've got to say that it's got to go up a notch, whatever that is.
You look at what the Ravens lost a lot on the defensive line. They did add Kevin Zeitler. When you look at the division as a whole, do the Browns, if the Browns were behind the Ravens, now Doug Lesmerises kind of yelled at me when I alluded to that. Did the Browns close the gap, or the Browns the favorites in the AFC North?
I definitely think they closed the gap. I'm not ready to say they're the favorites. I still think, look, they lost to Baltimore twice last year. Now, that Monday night game was the game of the year. It was an awesome game. But I'm just not ready to say that they've completely overtaken the Ravens, because eventually the Browns will be in the boat the Ravens are in, where they aren't going to have these spectacular free agency periods, right? It's going to be about keeping your guys internally, focusing on the draft. The Browns are going to be a team that wants to collect comp picks, kind of like the Ravens do, who love to collect comp picks. The Ravens are a very analytics-driven organization too, much like the Browns. And so I think you're going to see the Browns offseasons look a little more similar to what happened to the Ravens this offseason, where they're going to lose some guys, but you're really not going to have a complete picture until we get to the draft and see who they pick, maybe some value free agents and things like that. But yes, the Browns certainly closed the gap. There are some people, Doug is probably one of them, who would make the case that the Browns surpassed the Ravens and they're the favorite in the AFC North. I'm going to play a little more conservative than that. I think they've closed the gap, but I don't think they've surpassed them yet.
You look at the Steelers and below average, and they lose Connor. Smith-Schuster re-signs, but he really hasn't been nearly as good since Antonio Brown left the Steelers. Do you think the Ravens and the Browns are a notch ahead of the Steelers and the Bengals? Is that fair?
I do. I'm not real bullish on the Steelers right now. Based on what I saw over the last, month and a half of the season, they really only played like one good half of football with their starters. That was against the Colts. And I think we all put too much stock in that. We all watched that and said, oh, the Steelers figured it out. They're back. And the reality was they weren't. And the Browns absolutely destroyed them in that wild card game. I don't really care about that comeback in the second half or the Big Ben threw for 500 yards in that game. A lot of empty numbers, I think, in that final total with Big Ben. I just can't believe in the Steelers. Now, that defense will still be really good, and they're getting Devin Bush back. They, of course, lost Bud Dupree and Mike Hilton, who, by the way, was very important to them as well in the slot. That team with Mike Tomlin, they're not going to have like a 5-win season. They'll win 8 games. They might win 9 games. They might put themselves in the discussion, but I think it's the Browns, the Ravens, and then the Steelers.
Well, and certainly there's not a lot left in the tank with Ben Roethlisberger. I think if the Steelers are banking on that, that's going to be a challenge. And he will have good games, but I don't think you can consistently count on him to do what he has done, the previous how many ever years in the NFL.
Yeah, if you're banking on Big Ben being, a year more removed from that elbow surgery and him turning it around, I just don't see it, because look, Big Ben's not going to be the guy that shows up and you say, boy, this guy definitely spent the whole offseason working out and getting in the best shape of his life. That's just not who Big Ben is. And he might put up some big numbers. He might put up some big stats. They might throw the ball a lot again this year, because I don't know how they're going to run the football. But I just can't, outside of the fact that I think Mike Tomlin's a really good coach, they draft really well, and that's just not a team that only wins 4 or 5 games in a season. There's nothing super tangible that says to me this team can win the AFC North.
The other one to keep an eye on is the Bengals. I think Joe Burrow is outstanding young quarterback. They need to get some big guys in front of them to protect Joe Burrow, but I think they're headed in the right direction, being the Bengals.
Right. I think they're probably still a year away from really being able to be a team that can kind of surprise people and compete within the division. But you said it, Burrow is a stud. I really liked what he did his rookie season. They did beef up their offensive line just a little bit. They added a tackle. And Cincinnati is a team that doesn't get fancy in the draft. They're not going to trade all over the place. They're going to stay put, and they're going to make picks. And for the most part, they've done okay in the draft. Now, they've had some hiccups over the last couple of years, but they're so consistent draft-wise that I think they'll end up adding some good players, and we'll get a more complete picture of what that offensive line is going to look like. I love their weapons on offense. I mean, they've got some weapons around Joe Burrow if they can protect him, and they can maybe get into some shootouts like they did with the Browns in that second meeting last year. But they're going in the right direction. They're not going to be there, though, in 2021.